A Passage to India, Chapter 14, Part 2. Ah, dearest Grasmere, its little lakes and mountains were beloved by them all. Romantic, yet manageable, it sprang from a kindlier planet. Here an untidy plain stretches to the knees of the Marabar. Good morning, put on your topies, shouted Aziz from farther down the train. Put on your topies at once. The early sun is highly dangerous for heads. I speak as a doctor. Good morning. Put on your own. Not for my thick head, he laughed, banging it and holding up pads of his hair. Nice creature he is, murmured Adela. Listen, Mohammed Latif says good morning next. Various pointless jests. Dr. Aziz, what's happened to your hills? The train has forgotten to stop. Perhaps it is a circular train and goes back to Chandapur without a break. Who knows? Having wandered off into the plain for a mile, the train slowed up against an elephant. There was a platform, too, but it shriveled into insignificance. An elephant, waving her painted forehead on the morn. Oh, what a surprise, called the ladies politely. Aziz said nothing, but he nearly burst with pride and relief. The elephant was the one grand feature of the picnic, and God alone knew what he had gone through to obtain her. Semi-official, she was best approached through the Nawab Bahadur, who was best approached through Noureddin. But he never answered letters. But his mother had great influence with him and was a friend of Hamdullah Begum's, who had been excessively kind and had promised to call on her provided the broken shutter of the Purdah carriage came back soon enough from Calcutta. That an elephant should depend from so long and so slender a string filled Aziz with content, and with humorous appreciation of the East, where the friends of friends are a reality, where everything gets done sometime, and sooner or later everyone gets his share of happiness. And Mohammed Latif was likewise content, because two of the guests had missed the train, and consequently he could ride on the hodal instead of following in a cart. And the servants were content because an elephant increased their self-esteem. And they tumbled out the luggage into the dust with shouts and bangs, issuing orders to one another, and convulsed with good will. It takes an hour to get there, an hour to get back, and 2 hours for the caves, which we will call 3, said Aziz, smiling charmingly. There was suddenly something regal about him. The train back is at 11:30, and you will be sitting down to your tiffin in Chandapur with Mr. Heaslop at exactly your usual hour, namely 1:15. I know everything about you. 4 hours, quite a small expedition, and an hour extra for misfortunes, which occurs somewhat frequently among my people. My idea is to plan everything without consulting you, but you, Mrs. Moore, or Miss Quested, you are at any moment to make alterations if you wish, even if it means giving up the caves. Do you agree? Then mount this wild animal. The elephant had knelt, gray and isolated like another hill. They climbed up the ladder, and he mounted shikar fashion, treading first on the sharp edge of the heel, and then into the looped-up tail. When Mohammed Latif followed him, the servant who held the end of the tail let go of it, according to previous instructions, so that the poor relative slipped and had to cling to the netting over the buttocks. It was a little piece of court buffoonery, and distressed only the ladies, whom it was intended to divert. Both of them disliked practical jokes. Then the beast rose in 2 shattering movements and poised them 10 feet above the plain. Immediately below was the scruff of life that an elephant always collects round its feet. Villagers, naked babies. The servants flung crockery into tongas. Hassan annexed the stallion intended for Aziz and defied Muhammad Ali's men from its altitude. The Brahmin, who had been hired to cook for Professor Godbole, was planted under an acacia tree to await their return. The train, also hoping to return, wobbled away through the fields, turning its head this way and that, like a centipede. And the only other movement to be seen was a movement of its antenna, really the counterpoises of the wells which rose and fell on their pivots of mud all over the plain, and disposed a feeble flow of water. The scene was agreeable rather than not in the mild morning air, but there was little color in it, and no vitality. As the elephant moved toward the hills, the pale sun had, by this time, saluted them to the base, and penciled shadows down their creases. A new quality occurred, a spiritual silence which invaded more senses than the ear. Life went on as usual, but had no consequences. That is to say, sounds did not echo or thoughts develop. Everything seemed cut off at its root, and therefore infected with illusion. For instance, there was some mounds by the edge of the track, low, serrated, and touched with whitewash. What were these mounds? Graves? Breasts of the goddess Parvati? The villagers beneath gave both replies. Again, there was a confusion about a snake which was never cleared up. Miss Quested saw a thin, dark object reared on the end at the farther side of the watercourse, and said, "A snake." The villagers agreed, and Aziz explained, "Yes, a black cobra, very venomous, who had reared himself up to watch the passing of the elephant." But when she looked through Ronnie's field glasses, she found it wasn't a snake, but the withered and twisted stump of a toddy palm. So she said, "It isn't a snake." The villagers contradicted her. She had put the word into their minds, and they refused to abandon it. Aziz admitted that it looked like a tree through the glasses, but insisted that it was a black cobra really, and improvised some rubbish about protective mimicry. Nothing was explained, and yet there was no romance. Films of heat radiated from the Kawa Dol precipices, increased the confusion. They came at irregular intervals and moved capriciously. A patch of field would jump as if it was being fried, and then lie quiet. As they drew closer, the radiation stopped. The elephant walked straight at the Kawa Dol, as if she would knock for admission with her forehead, then swerved and followed a path round its base. The stones plunged straight into the earth like cliffs into the sea, and while Miss Quested was remarking on this and saying that it was striking, the plane quietly disappeared, peeled off, so to speak, and nothing was to be seen on either side but the granite, very dead and quiet. The sky dominated as usual, but seemed unhealthily near, adhering like a ceiling to the summits of the precipices. It was as if the contents of the corridor had never been changed. Occupied by its own munificence, Aziz noticed nothing. His guest noticed a little. They did not feel that it was an attractive place or quite worth visiting, and wished it could have turned into some Mohammedan object, such as a mosque, which their host would have appreciated and explained. His ignorance became evident, and was really rather a drawback. In spite of his gay, confident talk, he had no notion how to treat this particular aspect of India. He was lost in it without Professor Godboll, like themselves. The corridor narrowed, then widened into a sort of tray. Here, more or less, was their goal. A ruined tank held a little water which would do for the animals, and close above the mud was punched a black hole, the first of the caves. 3 hills encircled the tray. 2 of them pumped out heat busily, but the third was in shadow, and here they camped. "A horrid, stuffy place, really," murmured Miss Moore to herself. "How quick your servants are!" Miss Quested exclaimed, for a cloth had already been laid with a vase of artificial flowers in its center, and Mohammed Ali's butler offered them poached eggs and tea for the second time. "I thought we would eat this before our caves, and breakfast after." "Isn't this breakfast?" "This breakfast? Did you think I should treat you so strangely?" He had been warned that English people never stop eating, and that he had better nourish them every 2 hours until a solid meal was ready. How very well it is all arranged, that you shall tell me when I return to Chandapur. Whatever disgraces I bring upon myself, you remain my guests. He spoke gravely now. They were dependent on him for a few hours, and he felt grateful to them for placing themselves in such a position. All was well so far. The elephant held a fresh cut bough in her lips, the tonga shaft stuck up into the air, the kitchen boy peeled potatoes. Hassan shouted, and Mohammed Latif stood as he ought, with a peeled switch in his hand. The expedition was a success, and it was Indian. An obscure young man had been allowed to show courtesy to visitors from another country, which is what all Indians long to do, even cynics like Muhammad Ali. But they never had the chance. Hospitality had been achieved. They were his guests. His honor was involved in their happiness, and any discomfort they endured would tear his own soul. Like most Orientals, Aziz overrated hospitality, mistaking it for intimacy and not seeing that it is tainted with the sense of possession. It was only when Mrs. Moore or Fielding was near him that he saw further and knew that it is more blessed to receive than to give. These two had strange and beautiful effects on him. They were his friends, his forever, and he theirs forever. He loved them so much that giving and receiving became one. He loved them even better than the Hamdullahs because he had surmounted the obstacles to meet them, and this stimulates the generous mind. Their images remained somewhat in his soul up to his dying day, permanent additions. He looked at her now as she sat on a deck chair, sipping his tea, and had for a moment a joy that held the seeds of its own decay, for it would lead him to think, "Oh, what more can I do for her?" And so back to the dull round of hospitality. The black bullets of his eyes filled with soft, expressive light, and he said, "Do you ever remember our mosque, Mrs. Moore?" I do," she said, suddenly vital and young. "And how rough and rude I was, and how good you were, and how happy we both were. Friendships last longest that begin like that, I think. Shall I ever entertain your other children?" "Do you know about the others?" "She will never talk about them to me," said Miss Quested, unintentionally breaking a spell. "Ralph and Stella, yes. I know everything about them. But we must not forget to visit our caves. One of the dreams of my life is accomplished in having you both here as my guests. You cannot imagine how you have honored me. I feel like the Emperor Babur." "Why like him?" she inquired, rising. "Because my ancestors came down with him from Afghanistan. They joined him at Herat. He also had often no more elephants than one, none sometimes, but he never ceased showing hospitality. When he fought or hunted or ran away, he would always stop for a time among hills just like us. He would never let go of hospitality and pleasure, and if there was only a little food, he would have it arranged nicely, and if only one musical instrument, he would compel it to play a beautiful tune. I take him as my ideal. He is the poor gentleman, and he became a great king. I thought another emperor is your favorite. I forget the name. You mentioned him at Mr. Fielding's. What my book calls Aurangzebe. Alamgir? Oh, yes, he was, of course, the most pious. But Babur, never in his whole life did he betray a friend. So I can only think of him this morning. And you know how he died? He laid down his life for his son, a death far more difficult than battle. They were caught in the heat. They should have gone back to Kabul for the bad weather, but could not for reasons of state. And at Agra, Humayun fell sick. Babur walked around the bed 3 times and said, "I have borne it away." And he did bear it away. The fever soon left his son and came to him instead, and he died. That is why I prefer Babur to Alamgar. I ought not to do so, but I do. However, I mustn't delay you. I see you are ready to start." "Not at all," she said, sitting down by Mrs. Morgan. "We enjoy talk like this very much." For at last he was talking about what he knew and felt, talking as he had in Fielding's garden house. He was again the Oriental guide whom they appreciated. "I always enjoy conversing about the Moguls. It is the chief pleasure I know. You see, those first 6 emperors were all most wonderful men, and as soon as one of them is mentioned, no matter which, I forget everything else in the world except the other 5. You could not find 6 such kings in all the countries of the earth. No, I mean coming one after the other, father, son." "Tell us something about Akbar." "Ah, you have heard the name of Akbar. Good. Hamadullah, whom you shall meet, will tell you that Akbar is the greatest of all. I say yes, Akbar is very wonderful, but half a Hindu. He was not a true Muslim, which makes Hamdullah cry, 'No more was Babar, he drank wine.' But Babar always repented afterwards, which makes the entire difference. And Akbar never repented of the new religion he invented instead of the Holy Koran." But wasn't Akbar's new religion very fine? It was to embrace the whole of India. Miss Quested, fine but foolish. You keep your religion, I mine. That is the best. Nothing embraces the whole of India. Nothing, nothing. And that was Akbar's mistake. And we'll pause here and we'll continue with this book in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.